Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thanks so much for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host, sometimes co-hosts, to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, their expertise, and of course, their unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is exploring best practices for user training and adoption. So, if you've ever wondered how to enable your users and ensure they get the most out of the solution that you've delivered, this is the session for you. And of course, that applies to internal as well as external customers, whether you're an admin or a consultant or related field, this session is certainly applicable. So I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session, Lizz Hellinga. Lizz is the CEO and founder, as well as a Salesforce and sales operations consultant at Walden Edge. She's also the co-founder of Montage Learning, creating custom learning experiences for her clients. Lizz has a unique blend of experience, beginning her tech career as an account executive, moving to a Salesforce admin role, and then transitioning to sales operations management before founding her own companies. It is awesome to have you here co-hosting Office Hours with me, Lizz. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here today to meet with all of you. But first and foremost, thank you all for your service. Veterans and military service is very near and dear to my heart. As my father's a veteran, my father-in-law is, and so I always appreciate when we make time to level people up in that community and help them as they transition out of military service. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to present to you all and talk with you about one of my favorite topics, which is, Salesforce training and adoption and change management. Just a little bit about my background, because I know all of you will get this. As Dave said, I'm a former salesperson, and how I ended up in the Salesforce career was that I moved companies and their new Salesforce system was horrible. And I just was the squeaky wheel who eventually got admin access. So we can all collectively cringe now because somebody gave the salesperson Salesforce admin access, but it changed my career. And I wouldn't be here today if it didn't happen. So poor choice by that VP of sales, but hey, here we are. But one of the things that, because I've been so involved in sales, like enablement and training really became important because, right, like what is your CRM? What is it worth if you can't get people to use it and adopt it? And one of my former leaders one time said to me that your CRM should be an asset. And so helping people adopt and use the platform will help turn your CRM into the asset that it needs to be so that your company can truly make business decisions based on it. So just a little bit about me. I'm also the Salesforce co-leader for the Chicago Women in Tech. I think I'm a 5-time Salesforce MVP. And if you want to connect, everybody's connecting with me on LinkedIn. And I also volunteer teach at City Colleges of Chicago, an Intro to Salesforce course, which has really been, for me, and I'm sure many of you can relate, it's just been such a great opportunity to give back and share Salesforce with those and watch them. Actually, some of them have actually gone to work at Salesforce, which is pretty cool. So have a lot of experience training and leveling up. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over a few slides, and then there's lots of topics for discussion. So I got to click share my screen. Oh dear, hold on. Let's see if I can do it this way. Okay, hold on. I got a new computer, so.
That was me, I think, last month. I got a Mac.
Yes, exactly. So let me just make sure I've got it up. Okay, all right. I think I'm going to have to leave and come back, potentially.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Talk amongst yourselves, folks.
Sorry about that. I haven't. Let me see if I can. I don't think I can do it while.
And if you can email it to me, I can try to present from my side as well. Either way.
Let's see if they'll let me. Sorry.
No worries. And while Liz is getting that set up, we'll go ahead and cover some admin topics. So if you're joining for the first time, I always like to explain the purpose of office hours before we open the floor for questions, discussions, and presentations. So these are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers and allies to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding-related topics in order to help you achieve your professional development and career-related goals. So if this is your first time, welcome. It's awesome to have you. This next hour is intended to be an opportunity for collaborative mentorship. So everyone on the call is encouraged to step up. This is your call and help both ask and answer questions from your perspective, which of course provides additional diversity of experience to the answers given and a richer dialogue. As you've already seen, folks are fairly active in chat, as am I. So keep your eye on the chat window during tonight's session. We'll be posting things in there. I like to post learning articles, networking opportunities, employment opportunities. If you would like to ask a question at any point during today's session, please feel free to do so. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, no worries, post it in chat and I will make sure to get to those in the order they are received. And then finally, tonight's session is being recorded, as you probably saw from the record button. If you'd like to share an attribution-free comment, just let me know before speaking and I will make sure that it's edited out of the final recording. And so welcome everyone. I think Liz left, oh, here we go. And she's back with her slides, excellent. Back to you, Liz. We've got your screen. Although you might be on mute. I don't know.
There we go.
Awesome.
All right. We're going to start with these. And then obviously, the more questions, the better. So I always like to start talking about adoption is more of like, let's create adoption success. This is always going to be a challenge, but there's many things that you can do within the app to increase adoption. So yes, you're going to do your trainings, right? You're going to have new hire onboarding, right? And you're going to train them on the platform. Most of the time, they're going to forget what you shared with them. You may roll out some new functionality and features, and you know how it goes, particularly with the sales team. They may or may not attend the session. And so they'll either have to try to sift through a recording or just wait until they try to do something. And then they're like, I can't do this anymore. So I talk about a lot around adoption with using the tools that are freely available within Salesforce to you today. So before we do that, so let's just chat, like, what is adoption? Does anybody want to, chat some replies of what their definition of platform adoption is? Or I don't say human adoption or dog adoption, but like what adoption means to some of you. Although I would like to adopt a puppy. Yep. Active use in Salesforce. Yep. Being able to migrate from one software to, yes, exactly. Getting buy-ins from your users to actually use the platform. Yes, exactly. Full use of license. And, I like the ownership one. All of this, right? There is a technical definition that's used in software world. And it's adoption is a process of accepting, integrating, and using technology. So many of the comments that you all made touch upon all of these, right? We know the people, like we've all had to deal with the ones that are not using the system and you're like, fine, we have to find a way to get them on it. And you don't want to really, take a top-down approach. You do want to build from the actual user persona and the end user journey. But sometimes you walk into an org and it's already been designed. And so most of these tips will pertain to that. There are awesome, the UI UX trail for with Salesforce is a great way to learn about how to design well from the beginning. But a lot of times we're plopped into orgs and we're trying to go backwards and trying to like design for them well, but also like get them to adapt at the same time. So accepting, integrating, and ultimately using the technology. So a little bit of everything, change management, training, all of that. So let's talk about who is responsible for adoption. And you're going to love this. Although we can't see ourselves in it, it's a mirror. We're all responsible for adoption. I would say leadership as well, and some of the other stakeholders. But ultimately, when you're thinking about how you're adding features and functionality, it's important to be adoption minded, because it's like if they have to click or scroll or do too much, it's going to be frustrating for them, and they just may not do it, or they just may ignore it, skip it, or wait to the last minute to do some of it. So as you in your role, whether you're a consultant or an admin, you are ultimately responsible for the adoption of the platform and what you choose to build, or what requirements you gather, and how you transition those requirements, excuse me, into Salesforce. Are there any questions? Does anyone agree or disagree on who's responsible for adoption? I want to say everybody is, but usually it is definitely the admin or those that are building in the platform. Justy's like, I like to point the mirror away from me. Yeah, customer success as well. They are a part of that too. All right. Stakeholders. Stakeholders are who you work with the platform. And I always recommend to everyone to just build out your stakeholder registry. You could create a custom object in Salesforce. You can use a spreadsheet if you need to. Some people like to use like OneNote or Evernote, but you really need to get a handle on who your stakeholders are, because that's ultimately how you're going to drive adoption. Yes, something simple as their name, understanding their functional area. So are they sales, marketing, finance, customer success, customer service, sometimes the admin team to the C-suite would be a functional area for you. So start to document their areas and the objects that they use often. So starting to build out this list will help you, one, and well, it's going to help you in a million ways, but from an adoption customer, Salesforce adoption perspective and change management, it'll help make sure that you leave no stone unturned. And it's never too late to start to gather this stakeholder registry. So ask them which objects they use often, and they may not understand like the terminology objects. You could just say, hey, what reports are you looking at? Can you send me a link to those? Because then usually what data they're looking at will help you understand what objects they care about, what processes they use or are a part of, right? Are they in the sales process? Are they a sales engineer that comes into the deal cycle, after the opportunity has been qualified? Are they part of an approval process where perhaps there's a discount that's being applied to the opportunity and they need to have somebody approve it? Those are ways to start to document how they engage with the platform. One of the things that I always ask too when I'm gathering what processes people are involved in is I usually ask them who else, because you don't want to leave any stone unturned. They may not actively be in Salesforce, but they may depend on some of that data, which could be a compelling reason for them to adopt. So thinking about the processes, documenting those, like I mentioned before, reports and dashboards that they review. And then lastly, ask people around about their communication preferences. So for example, you may have people that, everybody's now we're on Slack, we're on text, we're on email. And although I don't get as many emails as I used to. Maybe they participate in a community or something, or maybe you have a public group. Find out what their communication preferences are so that you can understand how to best reach them when necessary. And we'll talk a little bit about communication overall and some strategies and tactics in a couple slides, but this is just an area for you to start building. And you're not going to be able to do this all from day one, but start to sketch it out and then even get people's feedback and buy-in on it. I guarantee you it'll help you in your role. And if you're in consulting, you're probably doing this already if you're on a project, but if you're in an admin role, definitely something to do. It's never too late to start documenting your stakeholders. So that is the step one for adoption successes. Know your people. Any questions or anything that you'd like to add around stakeholders?
I just got a quick question. You mentioned that oftentimes you're inheriting an org and you're having to work your adoption strategy from that standpoint. For those folks that maybe are just joining a project before the solution's created and they're going to be building out an implementation for a customer, how early should you start working on adoption, right? So should you start working on it even before the solution's built?
Yes, I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, so a lot of times when you're on a project, they'll sometimes call adoption change management. And so that's going to be really like your communication strategy. So this list of stakeholders that you're going to build, that you'll be building as part of your implementation project, the communication preferences right here will be really important. And who does the communication will be very important. Where, like, sometimes you want people, sometimes you're going to take a top-down approach because you're going to want to be like, hey, we're so excited. We're kicking out this great Salesforce project, and it's going to transform X, Y, and Z. And you'll want to start to build up that rah-rah mentality around it so that people get excited. But yes, you'll want to do that, but you'll really want to focus on the communication strategy at the beginning. And then the other thing that I like to call is a from to, which would be like a from to slide. So what's the processes that they're struggling with, and how awesome are they going to be in Salesforce? So what are you improving? And a lot of that you should be able to get from the documentation that's gathered early on, like in discovery and collaborating with, the architects, as well as the business analyst to pull, and you may be the business analyst or you may be the architect, as well as pulling that all together so that you can share where the points of friction will be reduced as they move to Salesforce. Got to know the WIFMs. What's in it for me, for the end users?
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So communication. Communication, right? We've been communicating for as long as we've been walking the earth, and we still always have challenges with it. The key is to really be consistent with your communication about whether it's a project or a change. Be clear, and if possible, make it searchable. This is probably one of the things that I've recently grown into, because I used to just keep everything, be like, oh, here, let me just share this PDF out of how-tos. But really, you want to make your communication searchable, whether you're using SharePoint or you're on the G Suite. You want to keep a repository of your communications, whether you're doing like a newsletter or you're doing how-tos, videos. You just want to make sure that people can search and find them. So just be mindful of that, so that and that'll help drive even some of the consistency in the language that you use in your training content or communication. I would always suggest to think about your communication in relation to the scale of change. So sometimes it could just be simple that you're just adding a pick list value, but it's an important pick list value, right? So maybe you posted in the Slack channel for sales or customer success, or you have, the leader, the sales leader, or the customer success manager, like, also filter it down. Think about like how important that change is and what the impact is based on your stakeholder chart. Will help you figure out like the level of communication. If you're doing an implementation, for example, like you're doing this at the beginning, this is like an implementation is big organizational change. So you're going to have a tiered approach for your communication. You're going to have leadership announcing. You're going to start to get your cheerleaders that are going to be a part of the program. You're going to have managers, and you're going to have to maybe feed them sound bites about how exciting this is and what the change is for. But just try to mirror the communication to the scale of change. So for example, like maybe you're removing a field that nobody used, right? Like you do like a field trip report, nobody's touched that field. There's like, 3,000 records, and there's data in 2 of those records. You may not even have to communicate that change, right? I mean, you probably should, like at some level, maybe on a weekly update or something, but you're not going to have to send like 5 communications around. this field being removed because it's only been used twice out of 3,000 records or something. So it's just, you'll get the hang of it. It's better but it is better to err on the side of over communicating than under communicating. So when in doubt, communicate a little bit more. It's better than not communicating at all. And then where appropriate, include the why if you can. And if you are a business analyst or you're a consultant or an internal consultant or Salesforce admin, most of the time people are sharing the why with you. I would always try to put a positive spin on it, so that sometimes there could be like, oh, like finance needs this field. You could just be like, oh, we're adding this field to better support the finance process. It's all like how you word things, but including the why is sometimes like a call to action to the users, right? It's like, I have to do this because I'm helping somebody, or I have to do this because this is going to impact, my commission, or, something along those lines. But usually it's important to include the why. Because you don't want everything to seem so top down, right? A lot of times with platforms, when people haven't spent the effort to think through an adoption strategy, it becomes top down. It's like, well, my VP told me to do this, but it's not it's not helpful for everyone. Like, you want to be able to get them with the why usually. What other things come up for all of you with communication to support adoption? We see a hand.
Wilfred. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I notice now with newer technology, especially with a lot of the automation that's going out there, when you put communication out, that searchability comment is really, really important. So don't forget to put hashtags into your communication, as well as tagging people in groups, so that these articles can actually be used as reference in the future. So when you need to reference something, they're not searching through folders and getting lost wherever this is. They can use these search engines. Also, when more AI is being utilized, some of the repositories can be built off of the references in those hashtags. They can draw it in to knowledge repositories, so that when you're integrating, say, self-service with left shift capabilities and then an AI on top of it, they can leverage these tags and references to really help someone move through a problem, a change, or an adoption, especially like new onboarding people or people who are transferring groups. Just putting in my 2 cents there. Thanks.
I love that. Exactly. And you said it much more eloquently than than I did. I appreciate that, because being searchable is important, because you know that you're going to do a training and they're going to zone out. They're going to be multitasking, and then they're going to get into the app to do something, and they're like, what do I do? How do I do this? And so being able to find their that content. We have another
hand from Jesse.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I would add into that I think shareability is a good additional piece onto this, because if you
I love
can,
that. I'm gonna actually
if you can, whatever message that you're providing to the stakeholders, if you can provide it to them in a way that they can then provide it to their people, now you're changing some of that change adoption motion to make sure that it's being owned more internally. And
exactly.
Nothing makes a stakeholder more comfortable than to talk about something from a lens that they feel like they understand it. Yeah, so if you can give it to them just right, and then they can give it to their people, now you got people working for you instead of you controlling and kind of monitoring that whole process alone.
Exactly.
A lot of heads nodding right now. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of what they're saying. Now, I'm new to consulting, so I appreciate this training and everyone's input. But something I think someone said earlier is really being able to communicate in a way that meets your users where they are. So, being able to put yourself in their shoes, maybe take yourself back to the first time you looked at Salesforce. You didn't know what any of that stuff was. So yeah, adjusting your language. Maybe it's not an object. Maybe, like you said, it's a report or dashboard. So really kind of simplifying the verbiage in a way that is more layman's terms and meeting them where they are. So I think that's helpful.
Exactly. And one of the things I forgot to mention was that And this is not so much for consulting. I know a lot of you are consultants, but you may become an admin and you may inherit an org. I'm always amazed at the amount of orgs that I walk into where they don't have like a consistent, regular cadence of communicating what's changing in the org. Like, so you're taking in requests and like you're making changes, but you're not like communicating back to the user base like on a consistent basis. So I know it sounds silly, but like a newsletter or a weekly update, like if you have a partner organization like within like sales enablement is doing outreach to the sales team, you can start to maybe put a Salesforce corner there or something like that, but start to develop methods for consistent communication. Because one of the biggest things is, and when you think about change management, is a lot of times when people have resistance to change, it's because there's a lack of trust. So when you are walking into an admin role, being able to be consistent with your communication and clear, creating it to be searchable, you start to develop that trust with your end users. And what that means is, yeah, it could be some little simple things that you're doing each week or every other week and you're sending out notices. But eventually, like you're going to have a big change. I hope you will, right? You get the big meaty project and you got to do something. Maybe you got to, load in CPQ or you're going to be integrating something else. But you'll have that trust built up with your stakeholders and your end users about what they can expect from you from communication. And that will increase adoption tremendously. And that's why sometimes as you're a consultant, sometimes it's hard because they're like, well, you're just a consultant, right? And the same thing goes true, but you just have a shorter amount of time to like build that trust. We have another question or another hand raised, sorry.
Hi there. Yeah, one other thing, I'm an internal admin for an org, and we work especially with nurses all over the country from East Coast to West Coast Central. And one thing that has been really helpful for us was weekly office hours where they can have that video FaceTime where they can just ask questions. So that builds that trust for them. So that has been really good for us as well. Office
hours are awesome. And you know what? Whenever I hold an office hours, I always walk away with more to-dos and more information about my stakeholders. So thanks for sharing that. I'm going to add that to my list too. Sorry.
While you're adding that, we've got a question from Iris in chat who says, I understand getting communication to stakeholders, but what's the best way for the reverse to track user adoption, especially if a group is not loving the change?
Let me make sure I'm just clearly understand. So are you saying like if you're getting feedback from them that they're not happy with what you've built or deployed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
This is another opportunity, Iris, right? To build that trust with them is I would, start to document that feedback as a requirement. And then give it back to them to maybe provide feedback on and then share it with the appropriate groups. It's, if you're doing a sprint demo, it's easier to incorporate, but if you're like an admin within an org, that may require, if they didn't go through if they didn't have an opportunity to do testing, always try to test with end users before you go live with anything. But then, being able to capture that pain is like one of the most validating things you can do for an end user.
I always, just from the organization I work at, I know that user adoption for anything that comes into our organization, if it's tech savvy people, they jump on it. But as we know, our organizations are made up of several different kinds of people. Mm-hmm. And how do you address that to the ones who, are a little more resistant? So I love what you just said. And I love that keeps like office hours to talk through points as well. So
it's just, sometimes you just have to get one-on-one with the users. I mean, it's time consuming, but I think it's so valuable. I don't know if any of you listen to the admins podcast and Mike Gerholt, but one of the first things I ever heard him say was SABWA, Salesforce Administration by Walking Around. I know that we all can't do that in these Zoom days, but you can Zoom around and meet people where they're at to get that feedback.
That's a great point. We've got a couple hand raised. Kelly was first, followed by Wilfred.
All right.
Just to Iris's point, something that was really successful on the consultant side for an implementation was we enabled a chatter group for their org, so that when they went live, we created a group for launch week. And anytime they ran into an issue or had a question, they could just @message launch week, in their chatter group. And it really gave us fantastic real-time visibility on their issues. We were able to get back to them, give them kind of reassuring, hey, I'm looking into this. And that was a really excellent launch for us. We, the few of our team members that were kind of on post go live hung around in that chatter group, and, we're getting notifications for the first week. And I think it really helped, especially this was a Service Cloud implementation, with their service feeling confident and being able to use the system and also have access to help as needed in real time. So
yeah, gotta love those chatter groups when they're used effectively. Wilfred?
I think Wilfred was next. Yep.
Yeah, this is just to build on what Iris and Kelly were talking about. And this is real important. And now I'm putting on my ITIL hat here. So channels are really good. Chatters are really good. Walking around is really good. But what's really effective is taking that information and putting it back into your knowledge repository. The best thing to do, depending on the structure or how the process is, because it's different for each company, you'll have to use a knowledge repository or a ticketing system or some sort of tracking or issue tracking system. So to be able to tie into that person, look, I spoke with you yesterday. Here's your ticket number that I'm putting in there. That's going to turn into a knowledge item, which we can then turn into a problem. Depending on how well versed your audience is, you can just tell them you're tracking it. You can give it status, so they can see this evolution from something that someone said to a problem statement, to then an issue, to then an actual bug fix, or maybe some other methodology. But then they can see the whole life cycle of that, and it builds a little bit of buy-in. And then you can give a status on that in your weekly or monthly calls to say, we gathered this information. We're knocked down like 20% of it, and thank you for the feedback. And here's what we're doing. So it all builds up all together. But the important part is the data that you're capturing and putting it in a system so you can see the metrics on it and see how effective your workarounds or your updates are to cause change and to affect resolution. Thanks.
Yeah, I love seeing that full life cycle, right? I was in an org recently, and people would create internal cases, right, for Salesforce in Salesforce. But then they would batch them over to Jira. So nobody had any transparency into so the end users were upset because they just didn't know what was happening to their cases because they didn't have the connections. So anyway, but it's just interesting to me when people don't realize the impact of removing visibility into that life cycle has. We all know how we feel if something goes wrong and we have to, I was on vacation, I had to log a case with Verizon, and if you can't see that visibility with your phone, with your case, it's very frustrating. And that's the visibility is one of the first steps into creating that trust with the end users. And then I love that knowledge item, live Service Cloud. We tell people to live Service Cloud.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Wilfred. We've got a couple questions in chat. First from Akib, and then from Carrie. Akib asks, from your experience, what's a good amount of super users to have in a committee? Is there ever too many or too few super users?
Yeah. Gosh, depends on how good you are at handling conflict resolution and negotiation, right? So at one point in my career, I was a solo admin for a large or for a small org that got acquired. They had 13 Salesforce instances, and they had probably 30 people on the committee for Salesforce. And we never got anything done because we just would debate things. Even though everybody had their own instance, they were trying to standardize across the instances, and it was tough. So it really depends on the size of your org and the number of clouds that you're supporting and the stakeholders. But I would emphasize that you would want people that are on, because sometimes they just put management on those committees. And I think that's disappointing to me, because I think that end users that are consistently in there and their daily, like their success in their job depends on the ability to use the platform. I think that they need a seat at the table at any of those. So yes, and it's not an easy answer, but you should have at least a couple from each cloud or business process that you're representing, like large scale business process, like marketing or marketing automation into Salesforce.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Carrie has asked, could you give an example of where you'd just rip the Band-Aid versus slowly ease the user into the implementation, and how you approach that differently?
Oh my gosh. How many of you, have any of you worked on Classic before?
Oof,
I know. So I was just, I'm on a project where we finally turned on Classic or turned on Lightning from Classic. And there were so many dependencies that we gave them like 3 months to just get used to Lightning, and we had office hours and all that stuff. But eventually, like, we had to turn it off. And we turned it off. And oddly, we had very few issues with it. But yeah, sometimes you do have to pull the Band-Aid. People like, they just love what they're comfortable in, right? Like, I don't know, you have your like stuffed animal from when you're a little kid, or your blanket, you know, or you have your routine that makes you feel good, like you want it. But sometimes, yeah, you do have to do that Band-Aid. But I still think you can prepare for that. Like, you shouldn't, I don't know, unless they're like, unless the end user is really problematic, then I would probably go to leadership, because it could just be a personal issue, not so much an end user, like platform issue. It just depends.
Yeah, and a hand raised from Carrie. Go ahead, Carrie.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh,
No problem. Any other ones?
I think that is all the questions at hand raised for the moment.
Okay. Oh my gosh, it's already 5:37. All right, let's go to
Time
my.
flies when you're having fun.
I love it. I love it. This is so great. Let me just go into my next slide real quick. Okay. I'm going to talk through some of these Salesforce tools. I actually have a free course. So I've presented this presentation at like Northeast Dreamin', Texas Dreamin', Florida Dreamin', a couple other places. But I took this and just turned the demo into a free online course that's like, it's like 15, 20 minutes at the most, but it walks you through all the Salesforce tools that I think that you should be using to help with adoption. The number one, I'm always shocked, right? Help text. Like, everybody puts the description of the field in there. They forget the help text. The help menu at the top of the page, learning paths. How many of you have started to dabble with in-app guidance and prompts? Okay, in-apps guidance and prompts, you get unlimited prompts, which is, and you've all seen these because they've had so many of them around MFA. If you've not seen an MFA prompt, I don't know where you've been, because they are in your org all the time. But that's an example of a prompt that you have the ability to use as an admin, as a consultant, as a BA, to share information with about your org. So if there's one thing that you look at today, like after this, I would go to, anytime you open a Lightning record page, I would go and check out in-app guidance prompts. You just search it in the help menu or in setup menu, just type in in-app, use the hyphen because it will not pull up otherwise, and play around with prompts. You can do it in one of your dev orgs too. You also get 3 free walkthroughs. So those will be like the step-by-step prompts that you see that if you keep clicking, it'll take you to another prompt. You get up to 10. Rich text components are getting back to this project of turning off Classic. We created a rich text component of the links to all the videos that we did for them. So we did a bunch of like short, like 1 or 2 minute videos. They posted them into their internal like training hub, but we linked to them all on the homepage so that they were front and center when anybody logs into Lightning and they're like, oh, how do I create an opportunity, or how do I use list views or things like that. You can use rich text components pretty much anywhere, right? But it's great to have them on the homepage front and center. And then somebody mentioned Chatter, but I'm a lot of people are on Slack, and we love Slack. Slack's similar concept to, I can't remember the person that shared, was it Kelly that shared like creating that Chatter group, using Slack in a similar way. I think it's interesting, even though people have Chatter, if they have Slack, they're using Slack for sure instead of Chatter. And Slack Canvas, David, I saw that Slack Canvas is coming. Is it here yet? I don't know if it's here yet. I just remember being excited at Dreamforce and talking the guy's ear off.
It's hard to tell because I have it, but I work at
Right.
Salesforce, and so
Yes.
but I will say when it is generally available, it's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
It's basically taking Quip and smashing it into Slack, so you have like this workspace within a conversation. It's cool.
Yeah. So we have a hand raise, so we can pause while we talk through some of these tools.
So I was just gonna say something that's not on the list that has really helped adoption in my work is screen flows. Like,
oh yes,
everybody loves having their own little screen flow that just takes them step by step through their most frequent record entry.
Yes. I know I need to include that because it's just, I feel like sometimes when I build it, it's so one-off. Like for me, it's like not one-off, but it's very specific. But from an adoption point of view, it's like, especially because you can go across objects, it's very handy with that. Also dynamic forms too, right? I mean, that's more of like UI, UX stuff, but dynamic forms, especially now that you can, and they're coming, I think cases would be live because we're live with Spring. But when dynamic forms for standard objects for opportunity account and contact were announced in the fall, it's a real game changer. So yes. And how to video, oh, go on.
Oh, my org uses quite a few custom objects so that like the screen flows especially help with those because
oh yeah,
you know, we made it up for them, so there's not even like a lot of standard training out there.
Yeah, that's a great addition.
Hand raised from Akib when you get a moment.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, Liz, I can talk about this topic forever. It will never end. So thank you so much for covering this. At what point do you put those videos in an LMS, or do you keep them just in Salesforce?
So most of the videos, yeah, it just depends. It really depends on the company's preferences and strategy. I actually just prefer to have them in G Suite, Google Drive if we can, because they're more searchable. It's easier to find. The LMS, like the one org that I'm talking about that we transitioned to Lightning, they had an LMS, they had Seismic, they had SharePoint. You know, they had they also had an online university. So it was like I would create the videos and they were posting them into like 4 different spots. And it was interesting because depending on their profile, we had to configure the rich text component on the homepage based on what link they had access to. Because like, for example, only sales would have access to Seismic. Great question. So yeah, whatever can be universally shared is my opinion, but that's not always the case. Oh, I have not played around with Omni Studio Flex cards. That's a little bit above my technical aptitude at this moment, but maybe I will look into that.
I was able to teach it to myself in the span of a week, and I think anybody can do that. It's and just real quick segue because I'm passionate about user training, and I'm also passionate about upskilling. it's really simple, whether you use a data raptor, which is basically just, it's kind of a vehicle for SQL, Salesforce Object Query Language, or you just write a SQL query, which you can Google or use ChatGPT to write your own SQL query. You get the data in, and then you just set rules for visibility, like you would for a filter for a component on your record page, and just show me this when when this equals this. And so I've been able to. But the difference between in my mind between the rich text components, which are awesome, is like I am a perfectionist when it comes to how things look, like very, very detail oriented, and you can really sculpt these flex cards to be on brand and beautiful if you have the time. And then obviously the logic you can use is much more complex if you want to in a flex card, because after a while, if you only have a certain number of filters you can set for a specific component. I think it's 9, I want to say, on a record page. And then obviously it slows down your record page too if it has to think a lot. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, I'm gonna play around with that when I have some downtime, because I would love to do that, because that is one of the rich text components. And I've tried to play around with the carousel from Salesforce Lab apps, and it's just not. It's hard to get it to look nice.
Yep.
So sometimes it's utilitarian what I got to do to get people to see things. All right. Any other questions? All right, so we won't have time to demo, but oh gosh, yeah, a subject. Yeah, I probably wrote that article. Which article from 2020? I don't remember. Oh yeah, that one. Oh yeah, that was way back. I'm gonna have to ask. I'll just have to contact them to update it. I hadn't helped out the evangelism team, so. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I used to be on Twitter a lot, but I haven't been on Twitter since like the spring, almost a year now. I mean, I'm there, but I don't check it. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to just message me, I know if you can't, this is like that free course that walks you through with videos on how to take advantage of some of those adoption tactics within Salesforce. Happy. So if you could just message me and I'll send you the link. They're literally, I won't spam. I won't follow up with you unless you want to message me about the course, but I mainly did it because I had just presented this so much that I thought, well, let's get a wider audience and give people the tactics. So you can take that and give me feedback if you can. I love it. Maybe I'll be adding some of the things that you all shared with me, like using these flex cards, building those, although that may be a whole course in itself. But what other questions do you all have that we didn't get to? I know that we have so many on this list, but what other things do you have that we didn't cover? I'm going to move you all back over here so I can see you.
And we'll grab Akib's question, and then we'll do a quick picture of the group, and then we can dive back in for the few moments left.
Okay.
Go ahead, Akib.
How important and at what points do you use stories for your trainings? Like for the why, for example, to get your stakeholders, when do you use actual engaging stories versus just saying facts?
I love stories, and I actually have taught like a WIT class about a simple story format. Yes, like stories are important, right? And how you engage the end users with them, it's usually got to be pretty specific to the organization. But I do like to use it because I mean, you saw me use some of it through here today, talking about like the switch from Classic that I can't believe. I mean, there are still orgs on Classic, but anyhow, I think it's just where it's appropriate. I mean, you could probably dig into some of your personal experiences too in previous organizations, but it's great if you can get some of that institutional knowledge to help drive some of those stories. Usually try to do positive stories. They're not always, but yeah, the sooner you can, the better.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and grab Wilfred's question or comment, and then we'll break for the photo. Go ahead.
Yeah, just thanks. Sorry to usurp so much time here. Just to bring in some of the military background on here, what we do is a lot of training, and you get a lot of young people who are really not as interested sometimes or overly physically tired. So the use of story is real important, and it can be as very very low key when you just, it's probably just a simple story about, oh, you have an actor here doing this. But what gets them awake, what gets them really intrigued is you bring them into the story. You call out a person from the crowd that is not feeling right or is looking tired, and you inspire them to come up here, come on. You're the one who's going to be doing this. This is what you can do. Ask them a question. They're not going to answer it, right? But this is where you help them and encourage them and get everyone to back them up. So stories are good, especially in how you utilize it and leverage it, especially with an audience that doesn't seem so key, or people who don't want to do the adoption or change. Get them inspired. See the little things where they can change, and then inspire them to do that. That's what we use in the military, and it's a great learning tool. And it's nice to see the young eyes open up and say, okay, I'm awake. I'm in this. Thank you.
Yeah, there's I have taken a class with a storyteller and actually brought him into one of my former companies. He calls this thing the ABT, and it's the world's shortest story format. I'm just going to chat his link to it. We used to make all of our salespeople, and actually any new hire coming into, I used to work at Silverline, we used to make them create what we call the ABT, which is an and but there statement, and it's the world's shortest story format. And it's powerful when you can distill things down into such a short story format and be really engaging. So check it out. Yeah, feel free to message me about storytelling. It's a craft, and I am very early on in my skill set of it.
Awesome. Yeah, great interaction and questions, everyone. Thank you. We've reached the point where, gosh, we're about 10 minutes before we close, so we better take a picture. So if you'd like to participate, go ahead and unmute your video. You don't have to. Totally fine if you remain with your camera off. While you're getting set up, we tend to think of user adoption and training as being important for admins and for consultants, but I would also argue it's important for solution engineers as well. Because often one of the, when a customer or prospective customer is thinking about buying Salesforce, what are their biggest concerns? Will my users use it? So if in your demo, you can show them, hey, here's some of the built-in user adoption tools that we have, and the ones that Liz brought up earlier, and you demo those, that's really powerful, and I've done that before. So yeah.
I'm always amazed. I think that sometimes what happens when you're building, and then we could take let's take the picture, but sometimes when you're building, you're so focused on the functionality, and you may know like, oh yeah, they're going to adopt this because it's great. But if you like show them how you're going to help them, it just reduces so much stress.
Yep, for sure. All right. So if we're all ready, give you a count of 3, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Perfect. I got it. So we can continue. And I'll just check in chat, make sure there's no questions. All right. And if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand and post those as well. I'm looking back through my questions because we covered so much. But so I guess one of the questions I do have, Liz, is, and this is kind of a two-part question, so this may take up the whole rest of the time, we'll see. But I think everyone knows that user training and adoption is critical. However, it's sometimes one of the first things cut when making budgetary decisions. So how do you make a business case to an organization's leaders to keep it in? And that might come in the form from you of a customer success story where you actually had to convince leadership to include it because they're like, we don't have budget.
Yeah, they always say that, but then it's like, well, how are people going to use the platform? I usually ask them about data, like the quality of data that they're having, like it, because that isn't usually like the cost of poor data can be detrimental to an org. So I'll talk with them about that. I don't normally get pushback on the training per se. I get pushback on the change management, which is interesting to me. It's like around the communication and the stakeholder analysis, and that's typically where I get the pushback. I have a very strong viewpoint where I'm like, you cannot implement, you can't do a large scale change of the platform if you do not include training, and even if it's train the trainer. Like I will beg them to at least do train the trainer to enable people to be able to handle it.
Yeah, you can't really afford not to, right?
Yeah,
and that kind of ties into the second piece. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to me. Like most of the time people want the training, they just don't understand the price tag sometimes with it.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
Do you have any guidance or best practices or tool sets for measuring the impact success of user training and adoption, whether that's like cases that have been entered and resolved, and
Yeah.
that's, you know,
So
yeah,
I would
what would that be?
usually it's around their metrics. Like, what do they care about? Right. Like one of the biggest questions that one of the biggest challenges I see a lot, because I deal a lot with sales operations and rev ops, is like we can't forecast. Like if you're not able to forecast for, you know, if every week you're having to have the salespeople go back and update their opportunities after you've had a forecast call because they didn't do it. Like if you're doing that multiple times, like that, you need to make some change. So yeah, there's a lot.
Kelly has her hand raised. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yep.
Hi, Liz. I wanted to quickly ask, what part does documentation play in user adoption, and what have you found to be the most successful? Either, you know, kind of long form manuals to keep on hand or short snippets. What's your recommendation for that?
So, people love quick reference guides. Have any of you used Tango? Tango is like this really awesome Chrome extension that you can use. It does put their logo on it. I have a paid subscription, so I can make like screen share, like screen recordings, and creates like PDFs, because you know how stale those things will get quickly, so you don't want to create a giant manual on that. But you know, documentation in terms of like, if you're, I mean, most implementations will have like user stories and acceptance criteria and all that, and that's great documentation. If you're an admin in your own org, you have to have a way to track change, to at least build that history and repository of that, and that's more around documenting your org. But I wouldn't do manuals. Videos are pretty awesome, but they should not be more than like 2 minutes, like really quick. I use a tool called Camtasia. It's only $250 a year, and it is awesome because I can edit out all of my ums or my pauses, or like if the screen's taking like too long, to get there. Like Camtasia is a great tool for video. I would never recommend I would never recommend like a 1 hour video, because unless you're going to annotate it and mark it up, then maybe, but people just don't have the capacity for that. So like you may do like a 1 hour training, but I actually don't even recommend one. I try to keep my trainings to 45 minutes or less. Mm-hmm. People want to cram so much in there, but nobody has capacity to take that all in, especially if they're watching you move around on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's funny because these sessions are an hour long, and I've noticed, and this is like our 89th session, I've noticed that the number of people that watch the full hour is much smaller than the number of people that watch like the 5-minute shorts that we were doing earlier. So people's consumption, appetite for consumption is very small bite size, which is why Trailhead's so popular, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if they're engaged, that's great. So I will, like when I deliver training, I break it all out and I ask questions, I do quizzes, I ask for budget to give things away for that. So training should never, if somebody wants you to do like a 90-minute training, I would just be like, I would run because nobody's going to retain it. So.
Yeah, what I used to do is I was a remote admin when I was still in the military, trying to get my volunteers, and we would have Friday remote sessions where I'd have half an hour, and I had a sandbox, a Trailhead sandbox, where I would set it up, and I'd have like these scenarios, like how do you create? Because we were doing a transition from Classic to Lightning as well.
Oh my goodness!
And so they're like, how do I create a contact? How do I do this? How do I create a report? And so I would just do it for them. There would be a couple of use cases. I do it for them, and then I'd say, okay, open floor. Like, what do you want to see me do in Salesforce? And they'd be like, well, I don't know, do this. And because I was new, if I didn't know it, I'd be like, okay, well, that's next time, because I don't know how to do that, but I'll research it and then we'll do that next week. Or if I did, I would just do it. So learning for me and learning for the users as well. And that's why I love user training and adoption, because your users aren't the only ones that's learning. Exactly. When you provide that teaching, you're learning as well.
Yeah. And then office hours, I learn so much in office hours because people don't ever want to talk up during a big training session, but if they come to office hours, they have something to say.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Thank you so much. We've reached the end of our session.
I can't believe it. Thank you
Yeah.
all.
This has been awesome. Like I always tell folks that like the measure of success for me in these sessions is if I ask is the number of questions I ask. So if I ask a lot of questions, you know, it's not as successful as if I'm pretty much quiet the whole session, because that means that all of you are engaging and asking questions, and that's certainly been the case here. So it's awesome to see. Before we do close, I want to thank Liz for spending the past hour with us to educate us about user training and adoption and tool sets. It's been awesome.
Yeah, reach out to me like anytime. If you have an adoption question, bounce an idea off of me, please. I'm happy to help. Just contact me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And thank you to all of you for spending your time with us this Wednesday evening. Hope to see you back next week. In the meantime, stay safe and thanks. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all. Thank you, Dave. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks, Liz.